Welcome to Home Care, Doors Open, where we discuss licensing, operations, and scaling your home care business. Whether you're just opening your doors or looking to unlock new doors to growth and success, this podcast is for you. Let's begin.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is Lucas Carroll with the Business of Senior Care, back again with another exciting podcast episode for our Home Care Doors Open. Today, we're super excited to welcome Dana Charumbira, the Managing Director at the Home Care CPAs. Welcome, Dana. Nice to have you.
Yeah, thanks, Lucas. Thanks for inviting me on.
I'm super excited today to talk to you about everything financial taxes, and inside of the home care business. And I know this is a world that we overlap in terms of the clientele that we work with. But to just sort of lay the groundwork, can you tell us a little bit about kind of what your company does, and what your role there in the company is?
Yeah, definitely. So kind of implied by the name, Home Care CPAs, we're an accounting firm. We work with home care agencies of all sizes, anywhere from startup, until they get to maybe 10, 15 million in revenue. So we've seen a lot. We support billing, payroll, accounting, taxes, and where we try to differentiate ourselves and really help in the home care space is on the financial planning and analysis side, and really helping owners understand when you look at your profit and loss, or you're looking at your cash flow and your runway, what does that really mean for the business, or what does that mean for you as an owner? In home care, a lot of times the owner is very involved in the business, and it becomes generally a large source of personal wealth when the business starts to do well. So we just really want to make sure that owners and that leadership team are understanding what they need to do to make that happen.
Awesome. How'd you get into this space?
Yeah, so I've been a CPA for 15 years. I did sort of the traditional route out of college, worked at a CPA firm. I started working for a large global manufacturing company that took me overseas to Southern Africa, which I lived there for 8 years or so. So during my time there, I really became, I would say, more aware of, how business really impacts lives. And when I was doing my MBA overseas, just thinking about the positive impact that business can make. So when I'm coming back to the US, looking for an industry that marries that passion and profit, I would say. So that's where we came across home care, my husband and I, really started getting into home care specific work in 2021. And just thinking about the lives around, helping clients, helping agency owners, caregivers, the families of clients. So just a lot of good that's done. And as the US population continues to age, really just serving our senior population and the people that are supporting them, with the help that they deserve.
Absolutely. Well, it's wonderful that there are organizations like yours out there to help to support home care agencies, because it's as you probably are experiencing, it is a booming business, and a booming area to be able to provide care for our senior population. For some of the questions, and when we talk about our viewership, a lot of times it's folks that are thinking about starting a home care agency, or maybe just starting, and then some experienced folks too who've been in it for a number of years. When you're talking to a prospective client or talking about some of the services that you provide, what are some important things to think about for somebody that's wanting to get into this business, and how they should craft their business or formulate things from the beginning, from the financial perspective?
Yeah, it's a good question. And there are a lot of different ways to think about it and attack it. And I think, what we're seeing a lot of the times, it's a second career. So someone's left a corporate space and they're looking to get into home care, or, someone might be taking on the family business from their parents that started at 20 or 25 years ago, and just kind of looking to give it like a fresh set of eyes and see what else they can do. So we support a lot of new agencies in different ways. I think a big thing that comes to mind for everybody is cash flow, right? So especially if you're kind of starting out and thinking about, maybe you have sort of this cash runway, you have money set aside, you're looking for funding. Potentially the SBA is a big one that we see to really get that startup capital. I think really having a defined understanding of where those funds will go. So if you get an SBA loan or SBA Express and you have $150,000, really carving out, having a budget that says, okay, what are we paying ourselves, or are we focusing purely on paying the business? Where are those funds going to go? Because while it feels like a lot of money, it goes really quickly. Home care can get expensive really quickly. So you typically have like a license fee, you have insurances, you potentially have rent before you open your doors. So understanding that licensure period, and then trying to be as strategic as you can before you open doors around, what expenses are going out. So really getting comfortable with the fact that that money will go and understanding where it's going to go so that it can be as, effective for you. Because what happens sometimes is people then start to feel this pressure around, trying to bring on clients, and they try to get the hours, and then they start to cut rates, and then, they get into this cycle of pricing themselves too low and paying caregivers too high, and it becomes just a really challenging business to then have to turn around. So that's one of the biggest things, is like just thinking through the cash flow of it. And then obviously getting, when you start your company, understanding a tax structure that's effective. And that really varies from like person to person. So a lot of the times we'll see an LLC that potentially takes like an S Corp election. So there's different times when that makes sense to do. And again, it varies from person to person, but sometimes, if the business is at a loss, you want to keep that in LLC and then potentially take the S Corp election later when you're starting to see profit. And then you take, a salary as an owner. So really just understanding what makes most sense there and how that'll impact your tax. Because most of the time an LLC or an S Corp is going to flow through your personal income tax return. So you want to just understand how that all works together. And yeah, those are like two of the biggest things. The other thing that we really try to make sure that new agencies are aware of and have an understanding of, and sometimes if you're in a franchise system, this comes with the training that they give the new owner, are the automations and the integrations in the systems that you're using. So right now, there's a lot of technology in the space, and there's a lot of exciting things that are happening. So most of the time, your CRM, your client management system, we just want to make sure that that really is the most effective structure for you from like a billing perspective. So how does that whole ecosystem work? Do you have the systems in place with like a contract and an EFT form, and getting that in place so that when you're going into that assessment, you're like ready to walk out of there and bill that client? Because the last thing you want to do is pay payroll, and then a month later, you're trying to figure out how you're going to collect from that client. So having efficient structures in place to enable them to really hit the ground running when they start taking on that first client.
Okay, so I'm curious, with clients that you start working with that maybe have been in business for a while, what are some common things that maybe you see in the home care space for home care businesses that you're like, oh, okay, these are things that we have to continue to correct over and over again when we start working with clients that maybe could help some existing businesses?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the times, so because we focus a lot on financial analysis, this comment will be more focused on like, measuring and understanding performance of the business. We don't see enough utilization of the payroll system and talking to their accounting software. And so a lot of the times people are just like dumping all their payroll into an overhead cost. So they don't have a true understanding of their gross margin. And people are like, well, I don't really care. My client management system will tell me that. And it does to an extent, if you're using it correctly. And that's another thing that we see, people aren't loading their burden, from their tax. Because people think sometimes like, okay, I'm paying my caregiver. I'll use a very basic example. I'm charging my client $40. I'm paying my caregiver $20. I'm making a 50% gross margin. And what's missed there is that you aren't taking into account the employer tax or the FICA side of things, workers' compensation, then if you're a franchise system, royalties. So typically that 50% comes down to like 38 to 40%. And that can be frustrating for an owner because they think they're supposed to be making all this money. And then it's like, where's the cash? We're like, what's happening? So really educating around getting all those systems to come together so that we can have a true understanding of what your profitability is, because that enables an owner to confidently make a decision. So like when an agency is first starting out, typically the owner is doing a lot of it. Maybe if it's like a husband and wife, they have divided responsibilities. And we see owners that don't value their time, so that, and not that they don't value it and that it's unimportant to them, but they don't put like a dollar value to that. So then, they're constantly doing a lot of things that are consuming their resources, which is their time, and they don't have the tools to say, okay, it makes sense for me to, hire like a recruiter or to offload some of my, just even the getting on Indeed and combing through ads, because they're so focused on like trying to hit that profitability. So that's where, getting all the systems set up and having a true understanding of where the cash is going and some of that profitability just helps equip people to better make decisions and then grow the business.
This episode is powered by the Business of Senior Care. The Business of Senior Care helps home care, home health, and hospice companies obtain their state home care license and accreditation through one-on-one consulting, fully customized policies, and years of expertise. To learn more, visit thebizofseniorcare.com. And now, back to our episode.
Okay, awesome. That's good. That's super good advice. When it comes time for year end, when you're working with clients, either maybe it's the first year in business or somebody that's 5 years in business, is there some things as you close out a year from a tax perspective or from running a business that you often recommend or you would suggest to somebody?
Yeah, so really that's sort of like a tax planning and strategy, I guess not question, but just sort of process to go through. And so we actually see a lot of times people hit like November, December, they're like, we want to make money 11 months out of the year. And then when it comes to paying taxes, we're like, wait, that's way too much money. How do we handle this now? Um, so really tax planning and just thinking through, like, when you do start to hit profitability, does it make sense to acquire a company asset? So do we buy a company car? Does that make more sense for us rather than paying mileage to our care managers to drive around? Or do we, um, have a benefit plan like a 401k or some sort of plan that we can share and use it as a recruiting tool, and then it also helps us from a tax perspective. So that really, we want to start thinking about that like middle of the year, and that's why having routine and regular review of what's happening financially helps, because then you're not sitting there in October, November thinking, okay, what happened in January? Where does this expense go? How do we unpack all of this? Because then we start to have a better idea ahead of time to start to plan for a lot of that.
Absolutely. Some of the basics that I just want to make sure for our audience to understand is like the services that you provide, the differences between tax strategy and like monthly bookkeeping and payroll and stuff like that. Those are different services. Can you talk a little bit about, to somebody who's looking to start a business, like what are those foundational elements that are important for the business and that you guys provide, and how are they different?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, and it can all kind of blend together as just sort of this financial management function, which is ideally what we want to provide. Because then, it's really this wraparound. The owner doesn't have to think about all these different components. So, payroll is really just helping them process and get that payroll out the door, taking that off of their plate. So, working with the software. Typically, the software is set up to do like a lot of the tax filings, like the 941s, the W-2s. So getting all of that accurate, handling anything around, if a caregiver is not paid correctly, how do we correct that? We do a lot of system and process improvement there. So that's typically when we start working with an agency, that's where we spend a lot of the time, is just understanding their processes. Because at the end of the day, all of that processing in their client management system is going to come out either in invoicing or payroll or on the accounting system. So we focus a lot on that in the beginning and setup. So payroll is really, processing, getting the caregivers paid. We help with billing more on the private pay or private duty side. There are really great providers that help with like contract government work for VA and Medicaid. That's not our space, but we have relationships with vendors that would do that, and they do a great job. So we would help more, like, we still see a lot of people manually creating bills and sending those out to clients. So we really encourage everybody to get on a weekly schedule. So like if someone's a startup, I recommend invoicing your private pay clients weekly, completely electronic, so EFT, ACH, or credit card. And that, really not dealing in check payers, and it's positioning that to the client around, we just want to make sure it's as effortless for you as possible. So we'll handle all of that. You'll see the invoice clearly showing like what hours are being worked and billed. So really having that process in place, that's the billing side. So we take care of all of that and make sure everything's getting processed and paid by the clients. And then bookkeeping, there are different sort of ideas around bookkeeping. So you can have like a very basic bookkeeping service, which we don't offer. We're more of like an accounting offering. So we do the bookkeeping, but we take it like a step further and make sure revenue and payroll are recorded in the correct periods. And people say like, okay, as you know, as long as my payroll and invoicing are hitting at the same time, and yes, that is good, but at the same time, when you're trying to do, month on month and understand why revenue's up or why payroll costs are up, we need to have everything in the correct period. And the biggest thing, which people don't think about now, some people do, but when you're going to sell the business or you want to exit, you really need to have 3 years of these financial statements ready and solid and good to go. So we're thinking about that now. It's set up. So we're structuring it so that at that point, in 3 years from now, we're not having to go back and unpack what happened in 2024 and we're already in 2027. So that's like an accounting offering, and that's where you get, your profit and loss, your balance sheet at the end of the month, and you can see what happened. And then where we take it a step further, which is where most of our clients find value. So like all this stuff is happening, behind the scenes, we're doing it. And then we put together, for clients to just have a one-page snapshot of their business at the end of each month. And that's where I say the financial planning and analysis comes into play, which is a little bit unique in the accounting space and in the industry. So we're looking at revenue fluctuation. Right now, it's popular to have like a payer source mix because care is getting more expensive. So we're looking and saying, if you want to start working with the VA, or if you want to start working with Medicaid, or potentially there's an area center on aging that you're looking to engage with, what percentage of your business does it make sense to engage in that space? Because typically the payment terms are longer, the reimbursement rates might be lower or different. So analyzing that and seeing the mix there and the working capital impact, really just doing a deep dive into the business and understanding decisions made and how they come out in the profit and loss. And that's where we really like to spend a lot of the time with owners at the end of the month. And that's where we rely heavily on automation, because the more that we can have done to allow us to spend time analyzing, the better. And then tax planning so there's tax planning and then there's tax prep. So tax planning is really more understanding, like, are we going to purchase an asset, or are we going to start a benefit plan, or we're going to have this profit, how do we handle that, or what are we doing, or we're going to have a loss, what does that mean for us? Can we carry it forward, or how does that come through? There are a lot of different things that can happen on the tax planning side. So that typically happens like throughout the year. And then tax prep and filing is really, once we get into the new year, we're going to be filing for 2024. So that's something that we offer as well.
Awesome. The one thing I was thinking for people who are starting is that the services that you offer, like you mentioned, the deciding on a business structure and stuff like that. I think, and hopefully you would agree, is that sort of thought process is on the front end for filing the correct structure and setting up your business, and the roles for that is just so crucial, not only to start your business, but from when you get through a year's worth of revenue and expenses, and it comes time for tax season, could have pretty big implications. And working with an agency like yours is you have those proactive conversations on what's the best fit for you and for your situation.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, the LLC became really popular for a while because it's somewhat easy to create. And the C Corp is not hard to create either. And I know typically when you're going through licensure, you need to have that entity formed when you're filling out the application. So sometimes that's just like a hurried decision, and then you get into it, and then you're trying to unpack, what's happening with my taxes. So thinking through that ahead of time, exactly, just makes it a lot easier and a lot clearer, and then you don't have all these surprises come year end when you're in your business.
Absolutely. You mentioned the licensure part, and I wanted to ask just a couple of questions on your experiences there with clients. That's kind of where our worlds intersect, is our clients are going through the sometimes frustrating licensure process, and they're at the beginning of starting their business and their journey for home care. And we just like you're saying, like an entity filing and a picking a tax structure, and those things are on the items that need to be completed for the application for licensure. For you and for the clients that you've worked with, is that how has that impacted startups or maybe a change of ownership or just onboarding with a client when it comes to the state licensure that they have to obtain?
In terms of the like entity structure that they've chosen.
Well, just the overall process. I know for us, it delays. They don't know they don't know exactly everything that they need for licensure, but business entity is a huge one, and so sometimes when you're working with a client, you're working with them for business entity structure and formation and all of that. At the same time, maybe they do, maybe they don't. Do they share stories of, okay, now I'm ready to go, but I'm waiting for this licensure thing, like delays in the process, delays in startup, and just kind of unanticipated due to licensure. I don't know if
Yeah,
you
like in
experienced that.
Yeah, so we have, yes, so that's like certain states too. I'm sure you're very familiar with certain states will have a longer lead time and can impact when they can open doors in terms of licensure. So we've seen agencies, yeah, that they're like ready to go. They have their entity, they have their insurance, they're just waiting for the license to come out. And that, I mean, it can be frustrating for owners. I think the biggest thing that we try to advise there is just keeping your fixed costs as low as possible. And so, you know, a lot of the time someone will go and rent this like office space and then they're sitting with this huge rent burden, or they hired somebody to help them with the business and they have this big salary that they're trying to pay to keep this person on board while they're waiting for the license to come in. So we really just want to make sure that people are aware of the timeline of the state, which would be more from, your side and some of the awareness there, and try to align some of those expenses with when that license will come out so that they're not burning through that sort of runway of cash that I mentioned earlier. And then I think the biggest thing is rent, which I know can vary state by state, and I'm not as familiar with some of the licensure laws because my understanding is there's like a licensure of a facility and then a licensure of like a business. So if the state licensing requirement allows sort of someone to be licensed and then change the address, what we would recommend is just getting something like very light, like a shared office space, and then moving into like a full-blown facility or an office, once you have the license in hand, just to kind of keep that rent expense as minimal as possible while you're waiting for it to come out.
That's such a good point. The office space, and even depending on the state, you could even start from home, and then once you get your license, you can transition to an office space or a co-working office space. Just understanding kind of like what the variables are, and then in some states for labor, on the labor side, you are required to have a registered nurse on your team, and so understanding, do I have to hire that person full time? How many months am I going to have to pay this person? Can I do it part time? Can I do it on a contract basis? And just looking at all those expenses, whether it's 2 months or 6 months that it's going to take to get through licensing, and put a plan together. I think that's such a good point. Putting a plan together. How can I get through this 4 months of licensing with minimal amount of expenses? And then how are my expenses going to change? How should they change once we do have the license? And that can save you a great amount of dollars just in the very beginning when it's very crucial for your funding.
Yeah, exactly. And I think sometimes people get like overly cautious, I would say, and they are like, you know what, we're going into this and we're going to do all these things, and then they start spending right away, feeling like the business will open and they'll start, building their client base, which can happen, but really our goal is to help them conserve those funds to really put them to use once they're fully operational and doors are open.
Perfect. Perfect. Any parting words or thoughts that you have? Somebody's looking to get into the home care game, start a business, and from the services that you offer, some things to think about to make sure that they consider in setting up their business.
Yeah, it's a good question. The thing that is, I'm sure anybody we talk to in home care, is it's an amazing industry and it serves a lot of purpose and has a lot of meaning. It's really hard work. Home care agency owners are pulled in so many directions, and it can just become very overwhelming. So our big piece of advice, or something that I think is really helpful, which now with the different service providers is potentially like an option, is outsource what you can and take it off your plate, because it can so quickly can become consumed by doing all these little things, and then at the end of the day you're like, hey, I didn't get done anything that really would move the needle on my business. So there's a
Absolutely.
lot of recruiting resources now that can be outsourced. There's a lot of office administrative resources that can be outsourced, like we're something that can be outsourced to. And so you can really build a very functional and very efficient agency by using outsourced services, because you're not hiring a full-time person. You're not having to manage them. You're not having to pay the employer tax on and workers' comp. So you're utilizing these vendors that are experts in their field and really can help you move your agency forward a lot faster without having to go through like the whole hiring process. So just relying on those experts in the industry that take it off your plate and do things a lot better.
That's such good advice. That's such good advice. And sometimes you feel like when you're starting the business that you got to do it all by yourself. And just that's such good advice that there are people that you don't have to hire full-time people. There are people and organizations like yours that can help to support you, and a number of different companies that can help to support you as you grow your business. So you're not all alone. It's not all just you trying to make it happen.
Yeah.
That's very good. Well, cool. Well, Dana, thank you so much for taking the time to share some wisdom with us on our podcast and with our home care owners out there around the country.
Thanks, Lucas. It was awesome. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again. Have a great day.
You too.
If you found this conversation valuable, please leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Also, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Business of Senior Care. We'll see you next time on Home Care. Doors open.